Imagine a world where cities with walls thicker than castles trembled at the sound of hoofbeats, even though the riders were few, lightly armored, and came from lands many maps barely noticed. It sounds impossible that people living in felt tents on windy grasslands could reshape half the known world, yet this strange imbalance between appearance and outcome sits at the heart of the Mongol story. How could speed defeat stone? How could discipline overpower numbers? And how could leaders who never ruled cities master empires filled with millions of people? The answer is not hidden in magic or luck, but in choices, systems, and a way of life that turned open land into an advantage rather than a weakness. As we step into this journey together, we do not begin in palaces or capitals, but on endless grass where survival itself was already a daily contest. The Mongol conquests feel shocking not because they happened fast, but because they grew from conditions that seemed unimportant to settled civilizations watching from afar. Long before conquest, the Mongols lived as nomadic herders, moving with seasons, animals, and water while learning from childhood that cooperation and awareness mattered more than comfort or decoration. Every family depended on horses, not just for travel, but for food, clothing, trade, and even stories, which meant riding skills developed as naturally as walking. Life on the steppe rewarded flexibility because weather could shift suddenly, pasture could disappear, and neighbors could become either allies or rivals without warning. This constant movement created people who observed landscapes carefully, remembered distances instinctively, and understood how fragile survival could be. Unlike farming societies that stored food in one place, nomads carried wealth with them, making loss and recovery part of everyday thinking. Children learned early that listening, adapting, and sharing were not moral lessons but practical tools for staying alive. Politics on the steppe did not grow from crowns or inherited thrones, but from reputation, loyalty, and the ability to protect followers during hard seasons. A leader who failed repeatedly could lose supporters quickly because families could simply leave and join another group. This created a harsh but effective system where leadership was constantly tested against results rather than promises. Power meant responsibility because hungry followers did not stay loyal for long. Into this world was born Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, whose early life reflected instability more than destiny. After his father's death, his family was abandoned by allies, forcing Temujin to experience betrayal, hunger, and danger before gaining any authority. These hardships shaped his thinking because he learned that survival depended less on noble birth and more on trust, planning, and shared purpose. As he slowly gathered followers, Temujin rewarded loyalty consistently, breaking old traditions that favored aristocratic bloodlines. This choice attracted people who valued fairness and opportunity, even if it angered powerful rivals. He reorganized society by loyalty groups rather than clans, weakening old divisions that often caused internal conflict. This social restructuring mattered deeply because unity became stronger than family rivalry. When disputes arose, decisions were swift and clear, reducing confusion that could otherwise spread across mobile communities. Military organization grew from everyday skills, since hunting, herding, and raiding had already taught coordination and communication. Mongol warriors trained continuously without formal drills because survival itself demanded riding, shooting, and teamwork. They used composite bows that were small but powerful, perfectly suited for shooting accurately from horseback. Each fighter carried multiple horses, allowing rapid movement and rest without slowing the group. Commands spread through signals, messengers, and shared expectations rather than loud orders. This made armies flexible, capable of changing direction quickly when conditions shifted. Discipline was strict, but it was practical rather than decorative, focused on maintaining order during movement, battle, and retreat. Loot was shared according to clear rules, preventing jealousy from breaking unity. Punishments existed, yet they aimed to protect the group rather than glorify authority. Intelligence gathering became central as scouts mapped routes, counted enemies, and observed habits long before any attack occurred. Enemies often mistook Mongol movements for retreat, not realizing flexibility was a tactic rather than fear. Speed itself became psychological pressure, spreading confusion before fighting even began. When Mongol groups first encountered larger settled states, the contrast could not have been clearer. Cities relied on walls, heavy infantry, and slow supply lines, believing mass and defense guaranteed safety. Officials underestimated nomadic forces, assuming they lacked organization or patience. However, Mongol leaders studied their opponents carefully, noticing political divisions, rival elites, and fragile communication systems. They learned to exploit fear as much as force, sometimes offering surrender before combat to reduce resistance. Stories of destruction traveled faster than armies, weakening morale in distant regions. Early victories reinforced confidence, but they also taught limits because fighting fortified cities required new methods. Instead of retreating, Mongols adapted by absorbing engineers, translators, and administrators from conquered lands. Practical knowledge mattered more than origin, which allowed technology and ideas to flow quickly through their forces. This openness surprised enemies who expected destruction rather than learning. Siege techniques improved rapidly, blending steppe mobility with captured expertise. Each conquest expanded not just territory, but understanding of how complex societies functioned. Rules were established to control behavior during campaigns, balancing fear with predictability. Merchants and envoys often received protection, encouraging communication across regions. Trade routes benefited from this stability, even as conquest expanded. The Mongols recognized that ruling required information, not just intimidation. Laws known as the Yasa emphasized order, loyalty, and collective responsibility. Though harsh, these rules created clarity within diverse groups. As territories grew, leadership relied on delegation, trust, and consistent systems rather than constant supervision. Messengers traveled astonishing distances, carrying information across continents with remarkable speed. This communication network connected far regions into a single, loosely managed system. While destruction occurred, so did exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. The early Mongol Empire balanced violence and organization in ways many societies struggled to understand. It was this combination, rather than sheer brutality, that enabled expansion beyond expectation. By the time neighboring powers grasped the scale of this transformation, foundations were already firmly set. The empire had not reached its furthest edges yet, but momentum grew from methods rather than chance. Each decision built upon earlier adaptations, reinforcing a structure designed for movement, control, and response. As we pause here, the story stands ready to move outward, carrying these systems beyond their original grasslands toward lands that would soon experience both shock and connection in equal measure. As expansion continued, Mongol leaders faced the challenge of ruling peoples who lived nothing like nomads, spoke unfamiliar languages, and followed laws tied to temples, markets, and long-settled streets. Instead of forcing one rigid system everywhere, the empire allowed local customs to survive as long as taxes flowed and rebellion stayed quiet. This approach reduced resistance because daily life often changed less than expected, even under new rulers. Officials from conquered regions were frequently retained since their knowledge of records, farming cycles, and administration proved too useful to discard. In many places, survival now depended on cooperation rather than defiance. The Mongols divided territories into manageable units, assigning trusted governors who answered directly to the Khans. These governors were watched carefully through reports, messengers, and overlapping responsibilities, ensuring that power never gathered too comfortably in one place. Fear existed, but it was structured and predictable, discouraging chaos rather than encouraging constant violence. Communication systems expanded, with relay stations providing food, horses, and shelter for messengers crossing enormous distances. Information moved faster than armies, shaping decisions long before battles occurred. Trade flourished under this protection because merchants could travel routes once threatened by bandits and hostile borders. Goods from China, the Middle East, and Europe moved alongside stories, technologies, and beliefs. Paper currency, medical knowledge, and navigation techniques traveled widely through these connections. While conquest opened roads through force, maintenance required cooperation and reliability. Even enemies recognized the advantages of stability once initial fear faded. The Mongol army itself evolved as campaigns stretched across climates and terrains far from the steppe. Strategies adapted to deserts, mountains, forests, and rivers, each demanding different logistics and tactics. Engineers built bridges, miners undermined walls, and naval forces appeared where rivers and seas mattered. This flexibility surprised defenders who expected nomads to fail outside open grasslands. Learning remained constant because survival still depended on adaptation rather than tradition. Leadership after Genghis Khan followed systems he established, although unity grew harder to maintain across generations. Different khans ruled separate regions, coordinating loosely while pursuing local priorities. This structure allowed rapid governance, but also introduced rivalries that required careful negotiation. Despite tensions, shared laws, communication networks, and military traditions held the empire together. For a time, cooperation outweighed conflict within the ruling family. The conquered populations experienced rule differently depending on location and leadership style. Some regions benefited from reduced taxation and increased trade, while others suffered harsh reprisals after resistance. Religious tolerance often surprised communities used to persecution under previous regimes. Scholars, craftsmen, and artisans sometimes found new opportunities under Mongol protection. Life remained uncertain, but possibilities expanded alongside dangers. Stories of Mongol rule spread across continents, growing larger and darker with distance. Fear amplified real events, turning strategic destruction into legends of endless slaughter. Yet reality was more complicated, combining violence, order, curiosity, and pragmatism. Empires before had conquered lands, but few connected them so directly. The Mongols unintentionally created pathways that later travelers, explorers, and traders would rely upon. Environmental and logistical limits eventually slowed expansion. Maintaining unity across enormous distances strained communication and loyalty. Local interests sometimes outweighed shared goals, leading to fragmentation. Still, the systems built earlier proved resilient, allowing regions to function independently for generations. Even decline followed patterns shaped by earlier organizational choices. Historians continue debating whether the Mongol conquests represent destruction or transformation. Cities were ruined, yet others rose through new trade routes and connections. Lives were lost, yet ideas traveled farther than ever before. The empire revealed how quickly the world could change under coordinated movement and shared purpose. Its legacy rests not only in conquest, but in connection. For the children of farmers, merchants, and scholars living under Mongol rule, the world felt suddenly larger and closer. Distant lands became reachable through stories carried by travelers and goods appearing in unfamiliar markets. This sense of expanded horizons reshaped how people understood geography and possibility. Borders felt less fixed, even as power remained strict. Change arrived unevenly but persistently. As generations passed, Mongol systems blended with local traditions, creating hybrid cultures across Asia and Europe. Administrations adjusted, armies localized, and trade networks evolved. The empire's shape shifted, but its influence lingered in unexpected ways. Languages absorbed new words, cuisines adopted new ingredients, and technologies crossed old boundaries. Movement became a defining feature of this era. What began on open grasslands had reshaped continents through planning, flexibility, and relentless adaptation. The Mongol story challenges assumptions about power, civilization, and progress. It shows how societies built for survival can outperform those built for permanence. The journey from tents to empires was neither smooth nor simple. It was shaped by choices made under pressure. As we step forward from this point, the paths opened by Mongol rule continue leading outward, toward encounters that would transform distant regions in ways no one on the steppe could have fully imagined.